The alarms blared inside the small spaceship, jolting the man awake. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. The ship's sensors had picked up something unusual, a massive energy signature coming from a nearby asteroid belt. He wasn't supposed to be here. This part of the galaxy was uncharted, dangerous, and off-limits. But curiosity had always been his weakness. He adjusted the controls, steering the ship closer to the source of the signal. The screens flickered, showing strange readings he had never seen before. His heart raced as he approached the asteroid belt. That's when he saw it, a massive, metallic object half buried in the rocks. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a ship. But not like any ship he had ever seen. The man hesitated. He knew he should report this to the authorities, but something inside him urged him to investigate. He suited up, grabbed his tools, and stepped out of his ship. The silence of space was overwhelming. The only sound he could hear was his own breathing inside the helmet. As he approached the alien ship, he noticed strange symbols etched into its surface. They glowed faintly, as if alive. The ship was damaged, with gaping holes and scorch marks. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't good. He carefully made his way inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior of the ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint light, and the air felt heavy, almost electric. He moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. That's when he heard it, a low, guttural sound coming from deeper inside the ship. His instincts told him to turn back, but something pulled him forward. He followed the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. The corridor opened into a large chamber, and there, in the center, lay a massive creature. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a mix of scales, fur, and glowing veins. It was wounded, its breathing labored. The creature's eyes opened, locking onto his. For a moment, he froze. But then, something strange happened. He felt a wave of emotions flooding his mind, fear, pain, and something else. Gratitude. The creature wasn't trying to attack him. It was asking for help. He hesitated. Helping an alien creature could be dangerous. He didn't know what it was capable of. But the look in its eyes, the emotions he felt, it was enough to convince him. He approached the creature slowly, speaking in a calm voice. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The creature let out a soft whimper, its massive body trembling. He noticed something then, the creature's belly was swollen. It was pregnant. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about saving one life. It was about saving two. He worked quickly, using his tools to stabilize the creature's wounds. It wasn't easy. The alien's biology was completely different from anything he had studied. But he managed to stop the bleeding and ease its pain. The creature's eyes never left him, filled with a mix of trust and desperation. As he finished, the ship suddenly shook violently. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. He looked around, panic rising in his chest. Something was coming. He could feel it. The creature let out a low growl, its eyes filled with fear. He knew he had to get them out of there. "Hold on," he said, gripping the creature's massive arm. "I'm getting us out of here." But as he turned to leave, the lights in the chamber dimmed, and a strange hum filled the air. He looked up, and his blood ran cold. Outside the ship, through the cracks in the hull, he saw them, ships, dozens of them, closing in fast. They weren't human. And they didn't look friendly. The man's mind raced. He had no weapons, no backup. Just himself, a wounded alien creature, and two unborn lives depending on him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a fight for survival. The man worked quickly, his hands trembling as he secured the alien creature to a makeshift stretcher. The creature was massive, its weight straining the limits of his strength, but he couldn't afford to waste time. The alien ships were closing in, their ominous hum growing louder with each passing second. He had to get them out of there. With a final heave, he managed to drag the creature into his small spaceship. The airlock hissed shut behind them, and he immediately fired up the engines. The ship lurched forward, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy beams from the pursuing vessels. His hands gripped the controls tightly as he navigated through the asteroid belt, using the rocks as cover. Once they were a safe distance away, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He turned to look at the creature, which lay motionless on the floor of the ship. Its chest rose and fell slowly, and its glowing veins pulsed faintly. It was alive, but barely. The man knelt beside the creature, examining its wounds. The alien scales were tough, but whatever had attacked it had left deep gashes that oozed a strange, glowing liquid. He rummaged through his medical supplies, pulling out bandages and antiseptics. He wasn't sure if they would work on an alien, but he had to try. As he cleaned the wounds, the creature's eyes fluttered open. It let out a low, rumbling sound, but it didn't seem aggressive. Instead, it watched him with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. The man felt another wave of emotions flood his mind, relief, trust, and something deeper, almost like a bond forming between them. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, more to reassure himself than the creature. "I'll figure this out." Over the next few hours, he tended to the creature's wounds as best as he could. He used his tools to stitch up the deeper cuts and applied a cooling gel to ease its pain. The creature seemed to understand his efforts, its eyes never leaving him. It even nudged his hand gently with its massive head, a gesture that felt oddly human. As the hours passed, the man found himself talking to the creature. He told it about his life, his loneliness, and how he had always felt like an outsider. It was strange, talking to an alien that couldn't respond in words, but the creature's presence was comforting. It was as if it understood him on a level no human ever could. But then, the creature suddenly tensed, its body shuddering violently. The man's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The creature was going into labor. He had no idea how to help an alien give birth, but he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. "It's okay," he said, placing a hand on the creature's side. "I'm here. I'll help you." The process was long and exhausting. The creature's cries echoed through the ship, each one sending a pang of guilt through the man. He did his best to assist, using his tools to carefully guide the hatchlings out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, two small, glowing creatures emerged, their tiny bodies covered in a soft, translucent membrane. The man stared in awe as the hatchlings wriggled free, their eyes blinking open for the first time. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, tiny versions of their mother, but with an otherworldly glow that made them seem almost magical. The mother creature let out a weak but contented sound, nuzzling her newborns gently. The hatchlings, however, seemed more interested in the man. They crawled toward him, their tiny claws clicking against the floor. Before he could react, one of them climbed onto his lap, while the other nestled against his arm. He froze, unsure of what to do. But then, he felt it, a warm, comforting sensation spreading through his chest. The hatchlings were bonding with him, just as their mother had. "Well, looks like you've adopted me," he said with a soft chuckle, gently stroking one of the hatchlings. It let out a tiny, chirping sound, its eyes glowing with what he could only describe as affection. But the moment of peace was short-lived. The ship's sensors suddenly beeped, alerting him to an incoming signal. He rushed to the controls, his heart sinking as he saw the readings. The alien ships were back, and this time, they were closer than ever. The man glanced at the mother creature and her hatchlings, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no way to fight them off. But he couldn't let them take the creatures. Not after everything they had been through. "We'll figure this out," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "I won't let anything happen to you." As the alien ships closed in, the man prepared for the fight of his life. But deep down, he knew this was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting the strange, beautiful family he had somehow become a part of. The man stared at the hatchlings, his mind racing. They were so small, so fragile, yet there was something extraordinary about them. Their tiny bodies glowed faintly, and their eyes sparkled with an intelligence that seemed far beyond their age. They clung to him, their tiny claws gripping his clothes as if they knew he was their only hope. The mother creature watched from the corner, her breathing still labored but her eyes filled with a quiet pride. She let out a soft, rumbling sound, and the hatchlings chirped in response. It was as if they were communicating in a language only they understood. The man gently placed the hatchlings on a soft blanket he had laid out, making sure they were comfortable. He then turned his attention back to the mother creature, checking her wounds. She was weak, but her condition seemed stable for now. He knew she needed more help than he could provide, but there was no time to find a proper medical facility. The alien ships were still out there, and he had to keep moving. As he worked, one of the hatchlings suddenly let out a high-pitched squeal. The man turned just in time to see a small, glowing orb forming in the air above it. His eyes widened in shock as the orb floated toward him, hovering just inches from his face. He reached out cautiously, and the orb dissolved into a warm, tingling sensation that spread through his body. It felt like energy. Pure, raw energy. "What are you?" he whispered, staring at the hatchling in awe. The hatchling chirped happily, its eyes glowing brighter. The other hatchling joined in, and soon, the air around them was filled with tiny, glowing orbs. The man watched in amazement as the orbs danced around the room, creating patterns of light that seemed almost alive. It was beautiful, but also a little unnerving. These hatchlings were no ordinary creatures, they had powers he couldn't even begin to understand. The mother creature let out a low growl, drawing his attention. Her eyes were fixed on the ship's control panel, where a warning light was flashing. The man rushed to the controls, his heart sinking as he saw the readings. The alien ships were closing in fast, their energy signatures growing stronger with each passing second. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, gripping the controls tightly. He set a course for the nearest habitable planet, hoping to lose their pursuers in the dense atmosphere. But as the ship accelerated, the hatchlings began to fuss, their tiny bodies trembling. The man glanced back at them, his chest tightening with worry. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're going to be okay." But the hatchlings didn't calm down. Instead, they started to glow brighter, their tiny orbs of light swirling around the room faster and faster. The man felt a strange pull, as if the hatchlings were trying to tell him something. He focused on the feeling, letting it guide him. Suddenly, the ship's sensors picked up something unusual, a hidden energy signature coming from a nearby moon. It was faint, but it matched the hatchlings' energy patterns. The man hesitated for a moment, then changed course, steering the ship toward the moon. As they approached, the hatchlings' glow intensified, and the mother creature let out a soft, approving sound. The man didn't know what they were leading him to, but he trusted them. He had to. The ship descended through the moon's atmosphere, landing in a dense forest. The man stepped out, carrying the hatchlings in his arms. The mother creature followed, her movements slow but determined. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves. As they moved deeper into the forest, the hatchlings' glow illuminated their path. The man felt a strange sense of calm, as if the forest itself was alive and watching over them. Finally, they reached a clearing, where a massive, ancient tree stood. Its trunk was covered in the same glowing symbols he had seen on the alien ship. The hatchlings chirped excitedly, wriggling in his arms. He set them down, and they immediately crawled toward the tree, their tiny claws digging into the soft soil. The man watched in awe as the tree began to glow, its branches swaying as if in greeting. The mother creature let out a low, rumbling sound, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. She nudged the man gently, as if to say, "This is where we belong." But before he could respond, a loud explosion shook the ground. The man spun around, his heart pounding as he saw the alien ships descending from the sky. They had found them. The hatchlings let out frightened chirps, their glow dimming as they huddled together. The man clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no way to fight them off. But he couldn't let them take the hatchlings. Not now. Not after everything. "Stay behind me," he said, stepping in front of the creatures. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew one thing: he would protect them, no matter what. As the alien ships landed, the hatchlings' glow suddenly flared, and the ancient tree began to hum with energy. The man felt a surge of power coursing through him, as if the forest itself was lending him its strength. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing: this was far from over. The alien ships landed with a deafening roar, their metallic hulls gleaming under the moon's pale light. The man stood in front of the hatchlings and their mother, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. He didn't know what he was up against, but he knew he couldn't back down. Not now. The hatchlings clung to his legs, their tiny bodies trembling. Their glow had dimmed, but their eyes were wide with fear. The mother creature let out a low growl, her body tense as she prepared to defend her young. The ancient tree behind them hummed with energy, its glowing symbols pulsing in rhythm with the hatchlings' faint light. The doors of the alien ships hissed open, and figures began to emerge. They were tall, armored, and carried weapons that glowed with a menacing light. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their movements were sharp and deliberate. These were no ordinary beings, they were hunters, and they had come for the hatchlings. The man took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. "You're not taking them." The hunters paused, their heads tilting slightly as if studying him. One of them stepped forward, its weapon raised. It spoke in a guttural, mechanical voice, the words translating through some unknown technology. "Surrender the creatures. They do not belong to you." The man clenched his fists. "They're not yours either. Leave them alone." The hunter didn't respond. Instead, it raised its weapon, aiming directly at the man. Time seemed to slow as the weapon charged, its tip glowing brighter and brighter. The man braced himself, knowing he had no way to dodge it. But just as the hunter fired, the hatchlings let out a high-pitched screech. Their glow flared suddenly, and a shimmering barrier appeared in front of the man, deflecting the energy blast. The force of the impact sent the hunter stumbling back, its weapon sparking and fizzling. The man stared in shock, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The hatchlings had protected him. Their tiny bodies were glowing brighter now, their eyes filled with determination. The mother creature let out a proud roar, her own body beginning to glow as well. The hunters hesitated, clearly surprised by the hatchlings' power. But they quickly regrouped, their weapons charging once more. The man knew they wouldn't stop. He had to act fast. "We need to get out of here," he said, scooping up the hatchlings. The mother creature followed, her movements slow but steady. The ancient tree's hum grew louder, its branches swaying as if urging them to move. The man ran, his legs burning with effort as he carried the hatchlings through the forest. The hunters gave chase, their heavy footsteps pounding against the ground. Energy blasts whizzed past him, scorching the trees and sending sparks flying. The forest seemed to come alive around them, the glowing symbols on the trees flaring brighter as if trying to shield them. But the hunters were relentless. They were faster, stronger, and better equipped. The man knew they couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. As they reached a narrow ravine, the man spotted a small cave hidden behind a cluster of glowing vines. He ducked inside, setting the hatchlings down gently. The mother creature followed, her body blocking the entrance as she let out a fierce growl. The man crouched beside the hatchlings, his mind racing. "We need to stop them," he whispered. "But I don't know how." The hatchlings chirped softly, their glow flickering. One of them crawled onto his hand, its tiny claws gripping his fingers. He felt a surge of warmth, and suddenly, an image flashed in his mind, a vision of the ancient tree, its roots spreading deep into the ground, connected to something far greater. The man's eyes widened as he understood. The tree wasn't just a tree, it was a source of power, a living entity tied to the hatchlings and their kind. And it could help them. "We need to get back to the tree," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's our only chance." The mother creature let out a low rumble, her eyes meeting his. She seemed to understand. With a final growl, she turned and charged out of the cave, her body glowing brighter than ever. The hunters were caught off guard, stumbling back as she lunged at them. The man didn't waste a second. He grabbed the hatchlings and ran, weaving through the forest as the sounds of battle echoed behind him. His heart ached at the thought of leaving the mother creature behind, but he knew she was buying them time, precious time. As they reached the clearing, the ancient tree's hum grew deafening. The hatchlings' glow flared, and the tree's symbols began to shift, forming a pattern that seemed to beckon them closer. The man set the hatchlings down at the base of the tree, his hands trembling. "What do I do?" he whispered, looking at the hatchlings. "Tell me what to do." The hatchlings chirped in unison, their tiny bodies glowing brighter and brighter. The man felt a surge of energy coursing through him, and suddenly, the tree's roots began to move, wrapping around him and the hatchlings. He gasped as the ground beneath him shifted, and the world around him blurred. When the light faded, he found himself standing in a vast, glowing cavern. The walls pulsed with energy, and the air was thick with a sense of ancient power. The hatchlings chirped happily, their glow illuminating the cavern. The man stared in awe, realizing they were no longer on the moon. The tree had transported them somewhere else, somewhere safe. But as he looked around, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The hunters were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had the hatchlings. The man knew he had to protect them, no matter the cost. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. The glowing cavern was unlike anything the man had ever seen. The walls pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, and the air was filled with a faint hum that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. The hatchlings chirped happily, their tiny bodies glowing brighter as they explored their new surroundings. The man watched them, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. But there was no time to rest. The hunters were still out there, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had the hatchlings. He needed to find a way to protect them, but he couldn't do it alone. As if in response to his thoughts, the cavern's light flickered, and a faint sound echoed through the air, a sound that wasn't coming from the hatchlings. The man tensed, his eyes scanning the cavern. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a woman, dressed in rugged armor and carrying a weapon that glowed with the same energy as the hunters' devices. But unlike the hunters, her expression was calm, almost curious. She raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," she said, her voice steady. "I've been watching you. You're not like the others." The man hesitated, his instincts telling him to be cautious. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Kira," she said, lowering her hands. "I'm part of a group that's been fighting the hunters for years. We've been searching for the hatchlings, and for you." The man frowned. "For me? Why?" Kira stepped closer, her eyes flicking to the hatchlings, who had stopped their exploration and were now watching her intently. "Because you're the one they've chosen. The hatchlings see you as their protector. And if you're going to keep them safe, you're going to need help. The man glanced at the hatchlings, their glowing eyes filled with trust. He knew Kira was right, he couldn't do this alone. But he also knew he couldn't trust her blindly. How do I know you're not working with the hunters? Kira smiled faintly. If I were, you'd already be dead. The hunters don't negotiate. They destroy. But we want to protect the hatchlings, just like you. The man studied her for a moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. All right. But if you try anything. I won't, Kira interrupted. You have my word. With that, she turned and gestured for him to follow. The man hesitated for a moment, then scooped up the hatchlings and followed her deeper into the cavern. The walls seemed to shift as they walked, the glowing symbols guiding their path. Finally, they reached a large chamber filled with strange, glowing devices and a group of people who looked just as rugged as Kira. This is our base, Kira explained. We've been hiding here for years, studying the hunters and their technology. But we've never been able to stop them, not without the hatchlings. The man set the hatchlings down, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Kira knelt beside one of the devices, her fingers brushing over its surface. The hatchlings are the key. Their powers are connected to the ancient energy that flows through this place. If we can harness that energy, we might stand a chance against the hunters. The man shook his head. I'm not using them as weapons. They're just babies. We're not asking you to, Kira said quickly. But their powers can help us. And if we don't act soon, the hunters will find us. They always do. The man looked at the hatchlings, who were now playing with a glowing orb that had formed in the air. He felt a pang of guilt at the thought of putting them in danger, but he also knew Kira was right. They couldn't hide forever. All right, he said finally. But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks. Kira nodded. Agreed. Over the next few hours, the rebels worked with the man to prepare for the hunters' inevitable attack. They showed him their weapons, their defenses, and their plans. The hatchlings watched curiously, their glow flickering as if they understood what was happening. But as the preparations continued, the man couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Kira and her group were helpful, but they were also secretive. They spoke in hushed tones when they thought he wasn't listening, and their eyes lingered on the hatchlings a little too long. Finally, as the group gathered to finalize their plans, the man confronted Kira. What aren't you telling me? Kira hesitated, her expression unreadable. There's something you need to know. The hunters aren't just after the hatchlings for their powers. They're after them because of what they represent. And what's that? The man asked, his voice tight. Kira took a deep breath. The hatchlings are the last of their kind. Their species was nearly wiped out by the hunters years ago. But they're also the key to unlocking the ancient energy that flows through this galaxy. If the hunters get their hands on them, they'll use that energy to destroy everything. The man's chest tightened as the weight of her words sank in. He looked at the hatchlings, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they played. They weren't just innocent creatures, they were the last hope for their kind, and possibly for the entire galaxy. We'll protect them, he said firmly. No matter what. Kira nodded, but her eyes were filled with a mix of determination and something else, something the man couldn't quite place. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he knew one thing, he couldn't do this alone. As the group prepared for battle, the man felt a surge of resolve. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would do whatever it took to keep the hatchlings safe. Even if it meant risking everything. The rebels' base was a hive of activity as everyone prepared for the inevitable attack. The man watched as Kira and her team worked tirelessly, their movements sharp and focused. But his attention kept drifting back to the hatchlings, who were now sitting in a corner, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they played with a cluster of glowing orbs. The man crouched beside them, a small smile tugging at his lips. Despite everything, the hatchlings seemed happy, their chirps and squeals filling the air. But he couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. They were so small, so innocent, and yet they carried the weight of an entire species on their tiny shoulders. One of the hatchlings noticed him and crawled into his lap, its glowing eyes staring up at him. The man gently stroked its soft scales, feeling a surge of warmth as the hatchling nuzzled against him. It was as if they could sense his worry and were trying to comfort him. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the hatchling. "I won't let anything happen to you." As if in response, the hatchling's glow flared, and a wave of energy washed over him. He felt a strange pull, as if the hatchling was trying to show him something. Closing his eyes, he focused on the feeling, letting it guide him. Suddenly, images flashed in his mind, visions of the ancient tree, its roots stretching deep into the ground, connected to a vast network of energy. He saw the hunters, their ships descending on a planet, their weapons tearing through everything in their path. And then he saw the hatchlings, their bodies glowing brighter than ever, standing at the center of a massive explosion of light. The man's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. The hatchling chirped softly, its eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. He didn't know what the vision meant, but he knew one thing: the hatchlings' powers were growing, and they were far more powerful than anyone realized. Kira approached, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the hatchlings. The man nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "They're showing me things. Visions, I think. I don't know what it means." Kira knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the hatchlings. "Their powers are tied to the ancient energy of this place. The more they grow, the stronger they'll become. But that also makes them more dangerous, to the hunters, and to us." The man frowned. "What do you mean?" Kira hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "The energy they control is unpredictable. If they lose control, it could destroy everything. That's why the hunters want them, and why we need to be careful." The man's chest tightened as her words sank in. He looked at the hatchlings, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they played. They were so innocent, so pure. The thought of them being used as weapons, or worse, losing control, was unbearable. "We'll protect them," he said firmly. "No matter what." "We'll protect them," he said firmly. "No matter what." Kira nodded, but her eyes were filled with a mix of determination and something else, something the man couldn't quite place. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he knew one thing: he couldn't do this alone. As the group prepared for battle, the man felt a surge of resolve. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would do whatever it took to keep the hatchlings safe. Even if it meant risking everything. The rebels' base was a hive of activity as everyone prepared for the inevitable attack. The man watched as Kira and her team worked tirelessly, their movements sharp and focused. But his attention kept drifting back to the hatchlings, who were now sitting in a corner, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they played with a cluster of glowing orbs. The man crouched beside them, a small smile tugging at his lips. Despite everything, the hatchlings seemed happy, their chirps and squeals filling the air. But he couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. They were so small, so innocent, and yet they carried the weight of an entire species on their tiny shoulders. One of the hatchlings noticed him and crawled into his lap, its glowing eyes staring up at him. The man gently stroked its soft scales, feeling a surge of warmth as the hatchling nuzzled against him. It was as if they could sense his worry and were trying to comfort him. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the hatchling. "I won't let anything happen to you." As if in response, the hatchling's glow flared, and a wave of energy washed over him. He felt a strange pull, as if the hatchling was trying to show him something. Closing his eyes, he focused on the feeling, letting it guide him. Suddenly, Images flashed in his mind, visions of the ancient tree, its roots stretching deep into the ground, connected to a vast network of energy. He saw the hunters, their ships descending on a planet, their weapons tearing through everything in their path. And then he saw the hatchlings, their bodies glowing brighter than ever, standing at the center of a massive explosion of light. The man's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. The hatchling chirped softly, its eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. He didn't know what the vision meant, but he knew one thing: the hatchlings' powers were growing, and they were far more powerful than anyone realized. Kira approached, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the hatchlings. The man nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "They're showing me things. Visions, I think. I don't know what it means." Kira knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the hatchlings. "Their powers are tied to the ancient energy of this place. The more they grow, the stronger they'll become. But that also makes them more dangerous, to the hunters, and to us." The man frowned. "What do you mean?" Kira hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "The energy they control is unpredictable. If they lose control, it could destroy everything. That's why the hunters want them, and why we need to be careful." The man's chest tightened as her words sank in. He looked at the hatchlings, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they played. They were so innocent, so pure. The thought of them being used as weapons, or worse, losing control, was unbearable. "We'll protect them," he said firmly. "No matter what." Kira nodded, but her expression was grim. "We'll do our best. But the hunters are coming, and they won't stop until they have the hatchlings. We need to be ready." As if on cue, the base's alarms blared, and the lights flickered. The man jumped to his feet, his heart pounding as the rebels scrambled into action. Kira grabbed her weapon, her eyes hard. "They're here," she said, her voice tight. "Get the hatchlings to safety. We'll hold them off." The man didn't argue. He scooped up the hatchlings, their tiny bodies trembling as they clung to him. He could feel their fear, their confusion, and it only strengthened his resolve. He wouldn't let anything happen to them. As he ran through the base, the sounds of battle echoed around him. Energy blasts shook the walls, and the air was thick with smoke. The rebels were putting up a fierce fight, but the hunters were relentless. The man knew they couldn't hold them off forever. He reached a hidden passageway, his hands trembling as he activated the door. The hatchlings chirped softly, their glow flickering as if they knew what was happening. He stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind him, and found himself in a small, glowing chamber. The walls were covered in the same symbols he had seen on the ancient tree, and the air was thick with energy. The hatchlings wriggled in his arms, their glow growing brighter as they seemed to recognize the place. "This is it," the man whispered, setting them down gently. "This is where you'll be safe." But as he turned to leave, the hatchlings let out a series of frantic chirps. They crawled toward him, their tiny claws gripping his clothes as if begging him to stay. He knelt beside them, his heart aching. "I have to go," he said softly. "I have to help the others. But I'll come back for you. I promise." The hatchlings stared at him, their glowing eyes filled with trust. One of them nuzzled against his hand, and he felt a surge of warmth as their energy flowed through him. It was as if they were giving him strength, reminding him of the bond they shared. With a final glance, the man stood and left the chamber, the door sliding shut behind him. He knew the hatchlings would be safe there, but he also knew the fight wasn't over. The hunters were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had the hatchlings. As he ran back toward the battle, his mind was filled with one thought: he would protect them, no matter the cost. The man sprinted through the base, the sounds of battle growing louder with every step. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Energy blasts lit up the corridors, and the walls shook with the force of the hunters' assault. He could hear the rebels shouting, their voices filled with desperation as they fought to hold the line. When he reached the main chamber, the scene was chaos. The rebels were outnumbered, their weapons barely holding back the hunters' relentless advance. Kira was at the forefront, her face streaked with sweat and dirt as she fired shot after shot. But even she was struggling to keep up. The man's heart pounded as he took in the situation. They were losing. And if they didn't do something soon, the hunters would break through and reach the hatchlings. Kira spotted him and shouted over the noise. "We can't hold them much longer." "Where are the hatchlings?" "Safe," the man replied, his voice tight. "But we need to buy more time. They're our only hope." Kira's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a massive explosion rocked the chamber, sending everyone sprawling. The man hit the ground hard, his ears ringing as debris rained down around him. When he looked up, his blood ran cold. The hunters had breached the defenses, their armored figures advancing with terrifying precision. The man scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He didn't have a weapon, and the rebels were too scattered to mount a counterattack. But he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Not while the hatchlings were in danger. As the hunters closed in, the man felt a sudden surge of energy. It wasn't coming from him, it was coming from the hatchlings. Their bond, their connection, was stronger than ever, and he could feel their power flowing through him. Without thinking, he raised his hands, and a shimmering barrier erupted around him, deflecting the hunters' energy blasts. The rebels stared in shock, their weapons lowering as they watched the man step forward, his body glowing with the same light as the hatchlings. "Get back," he shouted, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "I'll handle this." The hunters hesitated, their weapons faltering as they took in the sight of the glowing man. But they quickly regrouped, their leader barking orders in their guttural language. They charged, their weapons blazing. The man braced himself, focusing on the energy flowing through him. He didn't know how to control it, but he didn't need to. The hatchlings were guiding him, their presence a steady force in his mind. As the hunters attacked, he unleashed the energy, sending a wave of light that knocked them back. The rebels cheered, their spirits lifted by the sudden turn of events. But the man knew it wasn't enough. The hunters were too many, and their weapons were too powerful. He couldn't keep this up forever. Kira ran to his side, her eyes wide with awe. "How are you doing this?" "It's the hatchlings," he replied, his voice strained. "They're giving me their power. But it's not enough. We need to get to the chamber, to the ancient tree. It's the only way to stop them." Kira nodded, her expression grim. "Then let's go. We'll cover you." With the rebels providing cover, the man fought his way through the base, his body glowing brighter with every step. The hunters pursued relentlessly, their weapons tearing through the rebels' defenses. But the man didn't stop. He couldn't. When they reached the hidden chamber, the man activated the door and stepped inside. The hatchlings were waiting for him, their tiny bodies glowing brighter than ever. They chirped happily as he approached, their eyes filled with trust. "It's time," he said softly, kneeling beside them. "We need to end this." The hatchlings seemed to understand. They crawled onto his hands, their glow merging with his. The man felt a surge of power, stronger than anything he had ever experienced. The ancient tree's symbols flared to life, the walls of the chamber pulsing with energy. As the hunters burst into the chamber, the man stood, his body radiating light. The hatchling's power flowed through him, and he raised his hands, unleashing a blinding wave of energy. The hunters were thrown back, their weapons shattering as the light consumed them. But the man didn't stop. He could feel the hatchlings' energy growing, their power reaching its peak. The ancient tree's hum grew deafening, and the chamber began to shake. The man knew what was coming, a final, devastating explosion of energy that would destroy the hunters once and for all. But it would also destroy him. The hatchlings chirped softly, their eyes filled with sadness. They knew what was about to happen. The man smiled, his heart aching as he looked at them. "It's okay," he whispered. "You'll be safe now." With a final surge of energy, the man unleashed the hatchling's power, the light engulfing everything in its path. The hunters were vaporized, their ships reduced to ash. The rebels watched in awe as the light spread, healing the base and restoring the ancient tree's energy. But when the light faded, the man was gone. The base was eerily quiet after the explosion of light. The rebels stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered as they took in the aftermath. The hunters were gone, their ships reduced to smoldering wreckage. The ancient tree's glow had dimmed, but its symbols still pulsed faintly, as if breathing a sigh of relief. Kira was the first to move. She ran to the hidden chamber, her heart pounding as she pushed open the door. The hatchlings were there, their tiny bodies glowing softly as they huddled together. But the man was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Kira whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened?" The hatchlings chirped softly, their eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. One of them crawled toward her, its tiny claws gripping her hand. She felt a surge of warmth, and suddenly, images flashed in her mind, visions of the man, his body glowing with light as he unleashed the hatchling's power. She saw the hunters being destroyed, the base being healed, and the man fading away, his sacrifice ensuring their safety. Kira's eyes filled with tears as the vision faded. He saved us," she said, her voice breaking. "He gave everything to protect you." The hatchlings chirped in unison, their glow flickering as if in agreement. They crawled into her arms, their tiny bodies trembling. Kira held them close, her heart aching with a mix of grief and awe. The man had been a stranger, someone who had stumbled into their fight by chance. And yet, he had become their greatest ally, their protector, and in the end, their savior. As the rebels gathered in the chamber, Kira turned to them, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "It's over. The hunters are gone. But we lost him. We lost the one who made this possible." The rebels bowed their heads, their faces filled with respect and sorrow. They had fought for years, risking everything to protect the hatchlings. But it was the man, an outsider, who had given them the chance to win. One of the rebels stepped forward, his voice quiet. "What do we do now?" Kira looked down at the hatchlings, their glowing eyes staring up at her. "We honor his sacrifice. We protect the hatchlings and ensure his legacy lives on." The hatchlings chirped softly, their glow brightening as if in agreement. Kira felt a surge of determination. The man had given them a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Over the next few days, the rebels worked to rebuild the base and strengthen their defenses. The hatchlings' powers continued to grow, their glow illuminating the chamber as they played and explored. Kira watched them closely, her heart swelling with pride. They were more than just creatures, they were the future, a symbol of hope in a galaxy that had known too much darkness. But as she spent more time with the hatchlings, Kira began to notice something strange. Their glow was changing, becoming brighter and more intense. And sometimes, when she looked at them, she thought she saw a faint outline, a familiar figure standing beside them, watching over them. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, a trick of the light. But one day, as she sat in the chamber, she felt a presence beside her. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the glow of the ancient tree, was the man. His body was translucent, his form shimmering with light. But his eyes were the same, kind, determined, and filled with love. You're here," Kira whispered, her voice trembling. The man smiled, his voice soft but clear. "I never left. The hatchling's power, it's more than just energy. It's life. And as long as they're safe, a part of me will always be with them. Kira felt tears streaming down her face as she reached out, her hand passing through his. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you." The man shook his head. "You don't need to be sorry. This was my choice. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The hatchlings chirped happily, their glow merging with the man's as they crawled toward him. He knelt beside them, his translucent hands brushing over their tiny bodies. "Take care of them," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "They're the future. And they'll need you, just like they needed me." Kira nodded, her heart swelling with determination. "I will. I promise." The man smiled one last time, his form beginning to fade. "Thank you, Kira. For everything." And then he was gone, his light merging with the hatchling's glow. Kira sat there for a long time, her mind racing with emotions. She didn't know how, but she knew the man's spirit would always be with them, guiding them, protecting them. As she looked at the hatchlings, their eyes filled with trust and hope, she felt a surge of resolve. The fight wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more battles. But they had something the hunters could never take away, a bond, a legacy, and a future worth fighting for. The base had been transformed. What was once a hidden refuge was now a thriving sanctuary, filled with life and light. The rebels worked together, their spirits lifted by the victory over the hunters and the promise of a brighter future. The ancient tree stood at the center of it all, its symbols glowing softly as if in approval. Kira stood in the chamber, watching the hatchlings play. Their glow was brighter than ever, their tiny bodies radiating energy and joy. They had grown so much in the weeks since the battle, their powers evolving in ways no one could have predicted. But despite their incredible abilities, they were still just children, curious, playful, and full of life. As Kira watched them, she felt a familiar presence beside her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The man's spirit had become a constant companion, his translucent form appearing whenever she needed guidance or comfort. "They're amazing, aren't they?" he said, his voice soft but filled with pride. Kira smiled, her eyes never leaving the hatchlings. "They are. And it's all thanks to you." The man shook his head. "No. It's thanks to all of us. To you, to the rebels, and to the hatchlings themselves. They're stronger than anyone realized." Kira turned to him, her expression serious. "What happens now? The hunters are gone, but there are still dangers out there. We can't let our guard down." The man nodded. "You're right. The galaxy is a dangerous place. But you've got something the hunters never did, hope. And as long as you hold on to that, you'll be unstoppable." Kira felt a surge of determination. She knew he was right. The fight wasn't over, but they had the tools to face whatever came their way. The hatchlings, the ancient tree, and the bond they shared, it was all they needed. As the days passed, the rebels worked to expand the sanctuary, creating a safe haven for anyone who needed it. The hatchlings' powers continued to grow, their glow illuminating the base and filling it with warmth. They became symbols of hope, their presence a reminder of what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. Kira spent every moment she could with the hatchlings, teaching them, guiding them, and learning from them in return. She felt a deep connection to them, as if they were her own children. And in a way, they were. They were the future, and she was determined to protect them. One day, as she sat in the chamber, the hatchlings crawled into her lap, their tiny bodies glowing softly. They chirped happily, their eyes filled with trust and love. Kira felt a surge of emotion, her heart swelling with pride. "You're going to do amazing things," she whispered, stroking their soft scales. "I know it." The hatchlings nuzzled against her, their glow merging with hers. In that moment, Kira felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The fight had been long and hard, but it had been worth it. They had won. And they had built something beautiful. As she looked at the ancient tree, its symbols pulsing with light, she felt a final surge of warmth. The man's spirit appeared one last time, his form glowing brighter than ever. "Thank you, Kira," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Kira smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. For showing us the way." The man nodded, his form beginning to fade. "Take care of them. And take care of yourself. The future is yours now." And then he was gone, his light merging with the ancient tree's glow. Kira sat there for a long time, her heart filled with a mix of sadness and hope. The man's sacrifice had given them a chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. As the hatchlings played around her, their laughter filling the chamber, Kira felt a surge of determination. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. And with the hatchlings by her side, she knew they could face anything. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape.